We have traveled through the rise, the struggle, and the secrets, but now we reach a threshold where time itself begins to speak. Have you ever felt the world shifting beneath your feet, so slowly that you didn't even notice it was happening? Today, we enter the final chapter, a time where the air grows heavy with the weight of years, and the land itself reveals its true face. Everything you thought you knew about this settlement is about to be reshaped by the quiet hand of time. Stay with me, for this is where the whispers finally become clear. If you are listening to my stories right now, I wonder, where in the world are you joining me from? Perhaps in the quiet of the night, or amidst the rush of the day. Wherever you are welcome here. But before we step further into the shadows of this enigma, if you are a soul drawn to the whispers of the past and the mysteries the world forgot, you have found your sanctuary. Join our growing circle of seekers by subscribing to Dreamy Old Stories. Together, let us journey into the depths of history where the truth remains hidden and every story carries a secret. Welcome back. This is Dreamy Old Stories, and today we uncover a tale that was never meant to be told. Across the settlement and the land beyond it, small differences begin to gather in ways that are not immediately clear. The color of the grasses shifts slightly, moving from a brighter tone toward something more muted. Leaves along the forest edge appear thicker in some places, thinner in others, suggesting a quiet cycle unfolding beyond direct attention. The sky carries a different quality of light, softer at certain moments, more diffused across the horizon. These changes do not arrive as events, but as gradual alterations that shape the overall appearance of the environment. The experience of these shifts is felt gently through the body rather than observed directly. The air carries a subtle variation in temperature, cooler at times when it was once warmer, or holding a different kind of warmth that feels less intense. The scent of the surroundings changes in quiet ways, with traces of dryness or moisture appearing and fading. Even the light feels different against the skin and eyes, creating a sense that something has shifted without clearly defining what it is. These sensations move softly through awareness, leaving only a faint impression. As time continues, these small changes begin to influence the patterns of the environment. The position of light throughout the day adjusts slightly, altering how shadows fall across the ground and structures. The movement of air carries a different rhythm, affecting how grasses and leaves respond. Some areas of the land appear more exposed, while others seem more covered, as growth and decay unfold together. These developments do not follow a clear moment of transition, but emerge through a continuous process that blends one state into another. Within this slow unfolding, there is a growing awareness that time does not present itself as a sequence of clear markers. Instead, it moves through the accumulation of small differences that gradually reshape what is familiar. The mind begins to notice this process in a quiet way, sensing change without needing to define it precisely. What was once known becomes slightly altered, not replaced, but transformed through subtle variation. Time reveals itself not as something that passes quickly, but as something that settles into the space, gently adjusting everything within it. Along the edges of the settlement, the forms of familiar objects and spaces begin to carry slight alterations that become noticeable only through continued attention. The surfaces would take on a deeper tone, shaped by exposure to air and light over extended periods. The ground shows faint differences in texture, where repeated contact and natural settling have altered its surface. Paths appear more defined in some places and less visible in others, depending on how they have been used. These changes do not stand apart from what was already there, but gently reshape the appearance of the same surroundings. The experience of moving through this space carries a subtle awareness of difference that is difficult to name directly. The air feels slightly altered, holding either more dryness or more moisture depending on the time. The scent shifts in quiet ways, sometimes carrying a trace of something older, something that has settled into the environment over time. The light feels softer at certain points or more distant, changing how it reaches the eyes and skin. These sensations do not announce themselves, but create a quiet impression that the space is no longer exactly as it once was. As these changes continue, small processes begin to influence the environment in ways that accumulate over time. Leaves fall and gather in thin layers, altering the ground beneath them. Surfaces wear down slightly, their edges becoming less sharp through repeated exposure. Growth appears in some areas while reseeding in others, creating a shifting balance that is never fixed. These developments do not follow a clear pattern that can be easily traced, but they contribute to a steady transformation that unfolds gradually. In observing these quiet alterations, there is a sense that time moves through presence rather than through visible markers. It is not measured by events, but by the way things become slightly different without losing their identity. The mind begins to adjust to this way of noticing, allowing change to be felt rather than clearly seen. What emerges is an understanding that time does not replace what exists, but works within it, shaping it slowly until the difference becomes part of what is now familiar. Further beyond the immediate spaces of the settlement, the wider landscape begins to carry signs of longer cycles unfolding across the land. The trees show variations in their foliage, some branches appearing fuller, while others reveal more of their structure beneath. The grasses across open ground shift in height and density, forming patterns that change subtly over extended periods. The water reflects these differences as well, carrying tones that deepen or lighten depending on what surrounds it. These changes do not arrive together, but appear gradually across different parts of the landscape. The experience of these broader shifts carries a quieter, more extended awareness that settles over time. The air feels different in its movement, sometimes heavier, sometimes lighter, shaping how it touches the skin. The scent of the land changes with these variations, carrying traces that suggest growth, decay, or renewal without clearly separating them. Sounds travel differently as well, influenced by the density of leaves or the openness of space. These sensory changes are not immediate, but become noticeable through continued presence within the environment. As time continues its quiet progression, small processes begin to influence how these patterns develop. Leaves fall and are replaced, grasses bend and rise again, and the surface of the land adjusts to cycles of moisture and dryness. Light shifts not only within a day, but across longer periods, altering how the landscape is revealed. These processes do not mark clear beginnings or endings, but form a continuous flow where one state blends into another without separation. In observing these wider changes, there is a growing sense that time extends beyond individual moments into a larger, ongoing movement. The mind begins to release the need to track each difference, allowing awareness to settle into the overall sense of gradual transformation. What is seen is not a sequence of events, but a quiet unfolding that reshapes the environment without drawing attention to itself. Time becomes something that is felt through presence, rather than something that can be clearly measured or defined. Within the settlement itself, the arrangement of spaces begins to carry the imprint of time in quieter, more intimate ways. The edges of shelters soften as materials respond to long exposure, their lines less defined than before. The ground within commonly used areas becomes more even, shaped by repeated movement that has pressed it into a smoother surface. Openings between structures feel slightly altered, not through deliberate change, but through gradual adjustment as materials settle. The overall form of the settlement remains recognizable, yet it carries a subtle difference in how each part connects to the others. The experience of being within this space reflects these changes in ways that are felt rather than directly observed. The air seems to move differently between the shelters, guided by shifts in structure that have developed over time. The scent of materials carries a deeper tone, shaped by long presence rather than recent use. The light entering these spaces feels softer, filtered through surfaces that have changed in texture and alignment. These sensory impressions create a quiet awareness that the space has evolved, even if no single moment of change can be identified. As time continues, small processes shape the settlement in ongoing ways. Materials respond to the conditions around them, adjusting their position or form through gradual interaction with air, light, and ground. Surfaces wear and settle, creating slight variations that accumulate over time. Some areas become more open, while others feel more enclosed, depending on how these processes unfold. These changes do not occur in isolation, but as part of a continuous sequence that reshapes the space without drawing attention. In observing these quiet transformations, there is a sense that time moves through the settlement not as an external force, but as something that works from within. The mind begins to notice how each part of the space carries its own pace of change, contributing to a larger pattern that cannot be seen all at once. What emerges is an understanding that time does not arrive or depart, but unfolds through the subtle reshaping of what is already present. Across longer stretches of awareness, the land begins to suggest a wider cycle that moves beyond a single day or moment. The tones of the landscape shift in a way that feels seasonal, where colors deepen or fade with a quiet progression. The grasses lean differently, some appearing more brittle, others more full, depending on how they have grown and settled. The trees carry subtle variations in their leaves, revealing changes that unfold slowly across extended periods. Even the water reflects these broader shifts, holding tones that respond to the evolving character of the land. The experience of these seasonal movements carries a softer, more diffused awareness. The air feels different in its depth, sometimes lighter, sometimes carrying a faint heaviness that lingers close to the ground. The scent of the surroundings changes in ways that are difficult to separate, blending hints of growth, dryness, and decay into a single presence. Light feels altered as well, arriving at slightly different angles and with a different intensity that shapes how the space is perceived. These sensations do not form clear boundaries, but create a quiet impression of ongoing change. As these longer cycles continue, small processes begin to overlap and influence one another. Growth gives way to thinning, and new forms appear as others recede. The ground responds to shifts in moisture, becoming softer or firmer over time. Surfaces take on different textures as they interact with these conditions, slowly altering their appearance. These changes do not occur in isolation, but blend together, forming a continuous flow that extends across the landscape. In observing these broader patterns, there is a growing sense that time holds multiple layers, each moving at its own pace. The mind begins to notice how these layers interact, creating a depth of change that cannot be reduced to a single measure. What is experienced is not a single passage, but a quiet accumulation of variations that shape the world over time. This awareness settles gently, allowing the presence of time to be felt without needing to define its movement. As attention settles into the later stages of this unfolding, the landscape begins to carry a quieter, more blended appearance, where earlier differences soften into a shared tone. The outlines of trees, shelters, and ground features remain present, yet they feel gently altered by the accumulation of small changes over time. Surfaces that once appeared more distinct now seem to carry a subtle continuity, shaped by long interaction with air, light, and movement. The arrangement of space remains familiar, but it holds a deeper sense of passage within its form. The experience of this moment carries a calm awareness that is less focused on individual sensations and more on an overall impression. The air feels balanced, neither sharply cool nor strongly warm, but settled into a steady presence. Scents blend together without standing apart, forming a quiet background that is felt rather than noticed directly. Sounds become more diffused, less defined in their origin, creating a soft layer that surrounds the space. These sensory qualities do not call for attention, but support a gentle sense of continuity. Subtle processes continue even within this softened state, though they are more difficult to distinguish individually. Light shifts slowly, altering how surfaces reflect and absorb it, while the ground continues its gradual adjustments beneath everything that rests upon it. Growth and decay persist together, shaping the environment in ways that are not immediately visible. These changes do not pause, but carry forward in a steady progression that extends beyond what can be directly observed. In this quiet culmination, there is a sense that time is not something that moves past the landscape, but something that becomes part of it. The mind begins to release the need to follow each change, allowing awareness to rest within the broader presence of ongoing transformation. What remains is not a fixed image, but a continuous unfolding that holds both what has been and what is becoming. Time is felt here not as a measure, but as a gentle presence woven into every part of the space. Time has done its work. The transformation is complete. But as the shadows settle, a new question emerges. What remains when everything else has faded away? Let us step into the silence of what was once a living breath. The shelters stand where they were formed, their shapes still following the ground with the same low, uneven lines. Openings remain visible, framing the interior spaces that once held movement and presence. Paths between the structures can still be traced by the smoother surface of the earth, though no new marks interrupt them. Objects lie where they were last placed, some leaning against wood, others resting directly on the ground. The arrangement of the settlement is intact, yet it carries a different quality now, one shaped by the absence of any visible activity. The experience of being within this space carries a subtle shift that is felt rather than clearly seen. The air seems to settle more deeply, holding a quiet weight that was less noticeable before. Sounds that once blended into a low rhythm are no longer present, leaving behind a softer, more open silence. Even the light feels different, entering the shelters without interruption, spreading across surfaces without being broken by movement. The atmosphere does not feel empty in a simple way, but altered, as if something that once filled it has quietly withdrawn. Small changes begin to shape how this absence is noticed over time. Dust gathers more evenly across surfaces, no longer disturbed by touch or movement. Light moves across the ground and objects without interruption, revealing details that might have gone unnoticed before. The paths between shelters begin to soften slightly, their edges less defined as they are no longer reinforced by repeated steps. These changes do not happen suddenly, but unfold gradually, making the absence more apparent through what is no longer altered. Within this quiet state, there is a growing awareness that absence has its own presence, shaping how the space is experienced. The mind begins to notice what is not happening, not as a lack to be filled, but as a condition that defines the environment in a new way. The settlement does not appear abandoned in a dramatic sense, but gently emptied, as if activity has stepped away without leaving a clear moment behind. This absence does not demand explanation, but invites a different kind of attention, one that listens to what is no longer there. Between the shelters, the open spaces begin to feel wider than before, not through any change in distance, but through the absence of movement that once passed through them. The ground stretches in gentle lines, with paths that no longer guide footsteps, but remain visible as faint traces. Objects that once marked activity now sit apart from one another, their placement unchanged, but their meaning altered. The edges of structures appear more defined against the surrounding space, as if the lack of presence allows their shapes to stand out more clearly within the settlement. The experience of moving through this space carries a quiet awareness that settles slowly into the body. The air feels still in a different way, not heavy, but undisturbed, allowing each breath to feel more noticeable. Sounds that do occur, such as a faint movement of wind or a distant natural tone, stand out more clearly against the surrounding quiet. Light touches surfaces more evenly, no longer interrupted by passing figures, creating a softer, uninterrupted flow across the ground and structures. These sensations create a sense of openness that feels both calm and unfamiliar. As time passes, subtle changes continue to shape the presence of absence within the settlement. Shadows move slowly across the empty paths, revealing and then softening the marks left behind. Surfaces gather small traces of dust and particles, smoothing out the sharper details that once stood out. The arrangement of objects remains the same, yet their relationship to the space begins to shift, as they are no longer part of ongoing use. These changes unfold gradually, allowing the absence to become more deeply felt over time. In observing this space, there is a quiet recognition that absence does not remove what was there, but changes how it is perceived. The mind begins to focus not on what remains, but on the difference created by what is no longer present. This awareness does not create emptiness in a simple sense, but introduces a new layer of experience, where the settlement is understood through what it no longer holds. Inside the shelters, the interior spaces reveal a quieter arrangement where objects and surfaces remain in their last positions. The ground within is slightly smoother, shaped by earlier use, yet now untouched by further movement. Openings in the walls allow light to enter in narrow angles, tracing soft patterns across the floor. Items that once served a purpose rest where they were left, some close together, others spaced apart, creating a loose arrangement that reflects earlier activity. The structure of each shelter remains clear, yet the space within feels altered by the lack of presence. The experience of standing within these interiors carries a different kind of awareness, shaped by the absence of sound and motion. The air feels more enclosed, holding a faint stillness that settles around the body. The scent of materials lingers quietly, no longer mixed with the presence of ongoing use, but softened into a subtle background. Light moves gently across surfaces, revealing textures without interruption, allowing each detail to appear more distinctly. The atmosphere feels contained, yet open in a way that does not demand attention. Over time, small changes begin to shape these interior spaces in quiet ways. Dust gathers along the ground and on objects, creating a thin layer that softens edges and reduces contrast. Light shifts as the day progresses, altering how surfaces are revealed and then concealed. The air moves lightly through the openings, causing slight changes in how materials rest or respond. These developments do not transform the space, but gradually adjust its appearance, making the absence more apparent. In observing these interiors, there is a sense that the space holds a memory of activity without needing to display it. The mind begins to notice how the arrangement of objects suggests past movement, yet offers no clear sequence of events. This creates a quiet tension between what is present and what is no longer happening. The shelter becomes less a place of action and more a place of quiet holding, where absence shapes the experience as much as presence once did. At the outer edges of the settlement, the transition between built space and open land becomes more noticeable. The boundary is not marked by walls or lines, but by a gradual thinning of structures until only the natural ground continues. The last shelters stand slightly apart, their forms facing outward toward the surrounding terrain. Beyond them, the land resumes its broader patterns of grass, earth, and scattered growth. The paths that once connected these outer spaces now fade into the ground, their direction still traceable, but no longer reinforced by movement. The experience of standing near this boundary carries a subtle difference in atmosphere. The air feels more open here, moving more freely across the space where structures no longer interrupt it. Sounds from the surrounding environment become more present, yet they arrive without blending into any human activity. The light feels wider as well, spreading across the ground without being shaped by nearby forms. There is a sense of transition in this space, not as a defined crossing, but as a gradual shift in how the environment is felt. As time continues, small changes begin to soften the connection between the settlement and the land beyond. The edges of paths lose their clarity, blending into the surrounding ground as their outlines fade. Objects near the boundary appear less connected to the structures, becoming part of the wider landscape rather than remaining within the settlement. The distinction between inside and outside becomes less defined, shaped by the absence of movement that once maintained it. These changes unfold slowly, altering how the space is perceived. In observing this boundary, there is a growing awareness that the separation between human presence and the surrounding world is not fixed. The mind begins to see how the absence of activity allows the two to merge more fully, creating a space that no longer feels divided. The settlement does not disappear, but becomes less distinct as part of a larger environment. This quiet blending does not erase what was there, but reshapes how it is understood within the wider landscape. In the central spaces between the shelters, the arrangement of objects and ground begins to take on a different kind of balance, one that is no longer shaped by movement, but by quiet placement. The open areas feel wider, with fewer interruptions, allowing the eye to move more freely across the space. Items that once marked activity now appear as fixed points, their positions unchanged yet more noticeable within the emptiness around them. The paths that connect these spaces remain visible, though they no longer carry direction, forming gentle lines that lead without being followed. The experience of being in this central area carries a subtle shift in how presence is felt. The air seems to hold a softer quality, where the absence of movement allows each breath to feel more distinct. Sounds that reach this space are few and distant, arriving without blending into a larger pattern. The light moves evenly across the ground and structures, revealing details with a quiet clarity that was less noticeable before. The atmosphere feels open, yet held within the arrangement of the space itself. As time passes, small processes begin to shape how this central area continues to settle. Dust gathers more evenly across surfaces, creating a softer texture that reduces contrast. Shadows shift slowly across the ground, tracing the passage of light without interruption. Objects remain in place, yet their relationship to the surrounding space becomes more defined through the absence of change. These subtle developments do not alter the structure of the settlement, but deepen the sense of stillness within it. In observing this central space, there is a quiet recognition that absence creates its own form of presence. The mind begins to notice how the lack of activity allows each element to stand more clearly within the whole. The settlement no longer feels defined by what happens within it, but by what remains when nothing is happening. This awareness does not create emptiness in a simple sense, but reveals a different layer of experience, where the space holds its form without requiring movement to sustain it. As the day lowers into evening, the entire settlement gathers into a quieter visual tone, where details soften and forms become more unified. The shelters remain in place, their outlines visible against the dimming light, while the spaces between them blend into broader areas of shadow. Objects that once stood out begin to merge into the ground around them, their shapes less distinct but still quietly present. The paths that cross the settlement fade further, no longer guiding the eye as clearly, but remaining as faint impressions within the surface. The atmosphere carries a deeper calm during this time, where the absence within the space becomes more fully felt. The air cools gently, settling across the ground and structures with a steady presence. Sounds are minimal, and when they do appear, they feel distant and separate from the settlement itself. The light moves slowly, leaving certain areas in shadow, while others hold the last traces of brightness. This creates a soft contrast that shapes how the space is experienced without introducing movement. Small changes continue even within this quieter phase, though they unfold in subtle ways. Shadows lengthen and begin to overlap, altering how the structures relate to one another visually. The ground reflects less detail, allowing only the larger forms to remain clear. The surfaces of objects respond to the fading light, appearing softer and less defined. These changes do not transform the settlement, but guide it into a state where absence becomes more integrated into the overall experience. In this final stage, there is a sense that the settlement has shifted into a different kind of presence, one that is no longer shaped by activity, but by quiet continuity. The mind begins to rest within this condition, no longer searching for movement or change, but accepting the space as it is. The absence does not feel incomplete, but settled, as if the place has entered a state where it holds itself without needing anything more. In a place where everything has been reclaimed by silence, you might think the story has ended, but sometimes the smallest mark tells the loudest tale. Look closer at the edge of the wood, where a single intention was carved into the grain. A word, a sign, a presence that refused to be forgotten. On one of the wooden posts near the edge of the settlement, a word has been cut into the surface with deliberate pressure. The letters are uneven in depth, some lines pressed deeper than others, suggesting the movement of a hand working slowly through the grain. The wood around the carving shows slight roughness where the surface was broken, small splinters lifted, and then settled back over time. The word stands alone without decoration, placed at a height where it can be seen easily, yet not positioned to draw attention beyond its quiet presence. The experience of encountering this mark carries a different kind of focus than the surrounding space. The texture of the carved lines feels sharper than the worn surface around them, creating a subtle contrast under the fingers. The scent of the wood is faint, carrying only a trace of what it once held when it was first cut. Light enters the grooves of the letters, creating thin shadows that shift as the sun moves, allowing the word to appear slightly different at each moment. These details draw attention without needing to explain themselves. Over time, small changes begin to shape how the carved word is seen. The edges of the letters soften slightly as the wood responds to air and exposure, reducing the sharpness of the original cuts. Fine particles gather within the grooves, altering how light settles into them. The surface around the carving adjusts as well, creating a subtle blending between the marked and unmarked areas. These changes do not erase the word, but gently transform how it appears within the larger surface of the wood. In observing this single mark, there is a quiet awareness that it holds a presence without offering clear meaning. The mind begins to consider its origin, yet no direct answer follows from the letters themselves. The word stands as a trace of intention, but its purpose remains open, allowing interpretation without resolution. It does not demand understanding, but invites a quiet form of attention, where the act of noticing becomes more significant than the act of explaining. The wooden surface that holds the word stands slightly apart from the other structures, positioned where the eye meets it without effort. The post leans just enough to suggest long exposure to wind and ground, its base settled unevenly into the earth. The carved letters follow the grain of the wood, some lines crossing natural patterns, others sinking into softer sections. Around the mark, the surface shows faint signs of earlier handling, worn areas where touch has passed repeatedly. The word is not framed or emphasized, yet its placement gives it a quiet prominence within the space. The experience of looking at the carving draws attention in a slow, steady way. The eye follows each letter without urgency, tracing the lines as they rise and fall with the texture of the wood. Light shifts across the surface, creating small contrasts between the carved grooves and the surrounding plane. The air around the post feels no different from elsewhere, yet the focus it creates brings a subtle stillness to perception. Even the act of standing near it feels slightly altered, as if attention has gathered more closely around this single point. As time continues, the interaction between the carving and its environment unfolds in small, quiet ways. Moisture from the air settles into the grooves at certain moments, darkening the lines briefly before fading again. The movement of light across the day changes how clearly the word can be seen, sometimes revealing it sharply, other times allowing it to blend more with the surface. The wood itself responds to these conditions, expanding and contracting slightly, altering the depth and clarity of the letters without removing them. In observing this mark, there is a sense that it holds a presence beyond its physical form, not through explanation, but through persistence. The mind begins to rest on the fact that it remains visible, even as everything around it shifts gradually. It does not direct attention outward, but holds in place, offering a quiet point of focus within a space otherwise shaped by absence. Around the post, the ground carries only faint traces of earlier movement, leaving the carved word as one of the few clear points that draw the eye. The surrounding space remains open, with no additional markings to guide interpretation or suggest connection. Nearby surfaces of wood and earth show no similar carvings, no repeated symbols, nothing that extends the presence of this single word. The isolation of the mark becomes more noticeable through this absence, allowing it to stand apart not through emphasis, but through the lack of anything that mirrors it. The experience of standing near the carving carries a subtle shift in attention that feels both focused and uncertain. The eye returns to the word repeatedly, not because it changes, but because it offers no clear direction for understanding. The surface of the wood feels familiar in texture, yet the carved lines interrupt that familiarity with their sharper edges. The light moves gently across the letters, revealing them clearly at one moment and softening them at another. These small variations do not resolve the presence of the word, but deepen the sense of quiet attention around it. Over time, the environment continues to interact with the carving in subtle ways that shape how it is perceived. The ground beneath the post settles slightly, altering its angle just enough to change how the word is viewed from different positions. The surface of the wood continues to respond to air and moisture, softening the contrast between carved and uncarved areas. The light of each day introduces slight differences in how the letters appear, sometimes more pronounced, sometimes more blended into the grain. In observing this single mark within a wider absence, there is a growing awareness that meaning does not always arrive with clarity. The mind begins to accept the presence of the word without needing to resolve its purpose or origin. It becomes less an object to be understood and more a point of quiet reflection, where attention lingers without conclusion. The word holds its place within the space, not as an answer, but as a presence that remains open. From different positions within the settlement, the carved word appears with slight variation, shaped by distance and angle rather than by any change in the mark itself. When viewed from farther away, the letters blend more into the surface, becoming part of the wood rather than standing apart from it. As one moves closer, the grooves regain their clarity, each line becoming more distinct against the grain. The post itself frames this shift in perception, its position allowing the word to move between visibility and subtlety depending on where attention is placed. The experience of approaching and stepping away from the carving carries a quiet rhythm of perception. The eye adjusts gradually, first noticing the shape of the post, then the presence of the word, and finally the details within each letter. When distance increases again, these layers soften in reverse, allowing the word to recede without disappearing entirely. The light plays a role in this experience, sometimes strengthening the contrast within the grooves, other times allowing the surface to appear more uniform. These changes in perception unfold without effort, guided by simple movement. As time passes, the relationship between the carving and its surroundings continues to shift in small, continuous ways. The angle of the sun alters how shadows fall within the letters, changing their depth and clarity throughout the day. The post responds to the ground beneath it, adjusting slightly over long periods, affecting how the word is positioned within the viewer's line of sight. These adjustments are not immediate, but accumulate gradually, shaping how the mark is encountered. In observing these variations, there is a sense that the mark does not remain fixed in experience, even if it remains fixed in place. The mind begins to notice how perception itself changes, influenced by distance, light, and position. The word becomes less a static object and more a shifting point of attention, offering different impressions without altering its form. This creates a quiet awareness that meaning may not lie solely within the mark, but within the way it is seen over time. At certain moments of the day, the carved word becomes more closely aligned with the changing light, allowing its presence to shift in subtle ways. When the sun lowers, the grooves of the letters hold deeper shadows, making the word appear more pronounced against the surface. At other times, the light falls more evenly across the wood, softening the contrast so that the carving blends into the grain. The post itself takes on different tones as the light moves, sometimes appearing warmer, sometimes more muted, altering how the word is framed within its surface. The experience of observing the carving during these changes carries a quiet variation that unfolds slowly. The eye adjusts to the shifting balance between light and shadow, allowing the word to appear with different levels of clarity. The texture of the wood feels more pronounced when the light is angled, revealing small details that are less visible at other times. The surrounding air does not draw attention, yet it carries the light in a way that shapes how the carving is seen. These sensory changes create a subtle movement within the act of looking. As the day progresses, the interaction between light and the carved word continues to evolve. Shadows within the letters lengthen or shorten, changing the depth that each line appears to hold. The surface of the wood reflects light differently as the angle shifts, sometimes highlighting the carving, other times allowing it to recede. These changes do not alter the word itself, but influence how it is perceived within the space. In observing these variations, there is a growing awareness that the mark is not experienced in a single fixed way. Its presence is shaped by conditions that change around it, allowing it to appear differently without losing its identity. The mind begins to recognize that what is seen is not only the carving itself, but the interaction between the mark and its environment. This creates a quiet understanding that perception is not constant, but moves gently with the changing conditions of light and time. As evening settles across the settlement, the carved word begins to lose its sharp visibility, not through disappearance, but through the soft blending of light and shadow. The grooves that once held clear contrast now carry deeper tones, merging more closely with the surface of the wood. The post stands within the dimming space, its form still present, though its details are less easily traced. The word remains where it was cut, yet it no longer draws the eye in the same direct way, becoming part of a quieter, more unified scene. The experience of observing the carving at this time carries a slower, more inward quality. The eye no longer follows each line of the letters with the same clarity, but senses their presence through memory and faint outline. The air feels cooler, and the light that remains settles gently across surfaces without revealing fine detail. Sounds are minimal, and the quiet around the post feels deeper, not empty, but more contained. The act of noticing becomes softer, guided less by sight and more by a general awareness of what is there. Subtle changes continue as the light fades further, shaping how the mark is held within the space. The shadows deepen and begin to merge, reducing the separation between the carved lines and the surrounding wood. The post itself becomes part of the larger darkness, its edges less distinct as it blends into the background. These changes unfold gradually, without a clear moment of transition, allowing the carving to remain present even as it becomes less visible. In this quiet phase, there is a sense that the mark no longer functions as a point of focus, but as part of a broader stillness that holds the entire space. The mind begins to release the need to see or understand it clearly, allowing its presence to settle into the background of awareness. The word remains, not as something that demands attention, but as something that endures quietly within the fading light, carrying its presence without needing to be fully seen. The word remains, a ghost in the grain, but as the light fades for the final time, The true meaning of this mark is about to reveal itself. We are at the end now, where memory and reality finally meet. Across the settlement and the land beyond it, everything holds its place within a quiet arrangement that feels settled yet unfinished. The shelters remain standing, their shapes familiar, though their purpose no longer active. The paths still trace faint lines across the ground, leading between spaces that no longer carry movement. Objects rest where they were left, forming small points within the wider landscape. The surrounding forest and open land extend outward as before, yet the entire scene carries a subtle sense of pause, as if something has been left incomplete without a clear ending. The experience of being within this space carries a gentle, lingering quality that settles slowly into awareness. The air feels calm, neither heavy nor light, but holding a steady presence that does not shift quickly. Sounds from the environment continue in soft layers, distant and unconnected to any human action. Light moves across the ground and structures in a quiet progression, revealing forms without drawing attention to any single detail. There is a sense that everything can be seen, yet nothing offers a clear direction for understanding. Over time, small changes continue to unfold, though they do not alter the overall feeling of the place. Light shifts, shadows move, and surfaces adjust in subtle ways. Yet these changes do not lead toward resolution. The paths soften slightly, objects settle further into the ground, and the edges of structures respond to the conditions around them. These processes carry forward gently, adding to the sense of continuity rather than creating any new development. The space evolves in detail, but not in meaning. Within this quiet condition, there is a growing awareness that the absence present here does not resolve itself into explanation. The mind begins to notice how the space holds a question without asking it directly, allowing it to remain open. There is no clear moment that defines what has happened or what will follow. Instead, there is only the steady presence of what remains, carrying a sense of incompleteness that does not demand to be filled, but quietly persists. Across the wider stretch of land, the settlement no longer stands as a central point, but as one element among many within the landscape. The trees hold their places along the edges, their forms rising and spreading in uneven patterns. The open ground extends between these natural boundaries, carrying faint traces of earlier presence without drawing focus to them. The shoreline remains visible at a distance, where water continues its steady movement. The arrangement of land, structure, and distance feels balanced, yet without a clear center, as if attention can settle anywhere without being guided. The experience of being within this wider space carries a sense of quiet openness that feels neither empty nor full. The air moves gently, touching the skin with a soft, steady flow that does not call attention to itself. Sounds arrive from different directions without forming a single pattern, each one separate yet part of the same environment. The light feels even, spreading across surfaces without emphasizing any particular detail. There is a sense that everything can be observed, yet nothing directs the mind toward a specific point of focus. As time continues, subtle shifts occur within this broader setting, though they do not gather into any clear progression. The light changes its angle, altering how the land is seen without changing its form. The movement of air adjusts slightly, influencing how trees and grasses respond. The water continues its motion along the shore, reflecting the sky in quiet variation. These changes unfold without building toward anything, forming a sequence that carries forward without creating resolution. In observing this wider stillness, There is a quiet awareness that the absence within the settlement extends beyond its boundaries. It becomes part of the entire landscape, shaping how everything is experienced without altering what is physically present. The mind begins to rest within this condition, no longer searching for meaning or conclusion. Instead, it allows the space to remain open, holding its quiet incompleteness without needing to resolve it into an answer. Closer to the ground, the details of the settlement and its surroundings reveal a quieter layer of presence that unfolds in small, unnoticed ways. The surface of the earth carries slight variations in texture, shaped by earlier movement and the slow settling of time. Fragments of material remain scattered in their places, forming a loose arrangement that no longer connects into any clear pattern. The edges of structures and objects appear softer now, blending more gently into the ground around them. These details do not draw attention on their own, but together they shape the overall character of the space. The experience of observing these smaller elements carries a sense of quiet closeness, where attention moves slowly across each detail. The air feels steady, neither pressing nor receding, holding a calm presence that allows each breath to pass without interruption. The scent of the land is faint, carrying only subtle traces that are difficult to separate from one another. Sounds are minimal, and when they do occur, they seem to pass through the space without altering it. The experience feels grounded, yet open, allowing awareness to settle without needing to focus. As time continues, these small details shift in ways that are almost imperceptible. The ground adjusts slightly beneath what rests upon it, allowing objects to settle into new positions without a clear moment of change. Light moves across surfaces, revealing different textures at different times of day. The environment continues its quiet processes, shaping the space through gradual, ongoing interaction. These changes do not lead toward any conclusion, but remain part of a continuous unfolding. In observing these subtle layers, there is a growing awareness that the unanswered quality of the place is held within its smallest details as much as in its wider form. The mind begins to notice how nothing within the space offers a clear direction or explanation, yet everything contributes to the same quiet presence. This creates a sense of completeness that includes its own incompleteness, allowing the space to remain open without needing to resolve into meaning. From a slightly raised point near the edge of the land, the settlement and its surroundings appear as a quiet arrangement held within a wider horizon. The shelters form low shapes against the ground, while the forest creates a darker boundary beyond. The shoreline traces a pale line in the distance, where water meets land in a soft, shifting edge. Nothing within this view draws attention more than anything else. Each element holds its place in equal measure, creating a scene that feels complete in its form, yet without any clear direction or purpose. The experience of viewing the space from this distance carries a sense of gentle detachment. The air feels lighter here, moving more freely across the open elevation, touching the skin with a steady calm. Sounds from below reach upward in softened tones, losing their clarity as they travel. The light spreads evenly across the entire landscape, reducing contrast and allowing all parts of the scene to blend together. This creates a feeling of quiet balance, where nothing stands apart or demands focus. As time continues, subtle changes influence how the scene is perceived from this vantage point. The position of the sun alters the distribution of light, shifting the emphasis across different areas of the land. Shadows lengthen and then soften, changing how shapes relate to one another. The movement of air influences the trees and grasses, introducing slight variations in texture across the landscape. These changes do not create new meaning, but gently adjust how the space is seen. In observing the settlement from this distance, there is a quiet realization that the unanswered nature of the place is not confined to a single point, but extends across the entire landscape. The mind begins to release the need to locate an origin or outcome, allowing the space to remain open in its stillness. The view does not offer resolution, but a broader sense of presence, where everything is held together without needing to be explained. As the light lowers toward evening, the landscape gathers into softer layers, where distance and detail begin to merge into a quieter whole. The settlement, the forest, and the shoreline settle into deeper tones, their edges less defined yet still recognizable within the fading light. The open ground between them appears more continuous, no longer divided by small variations in texture or form. The entire scene feels gently unified, as if the day is drawing the separate elements closer together without altering their position or arrangement. The experience of this time carries a calm, inward quality that settles across awareness. The air cools slightly, touching the skin with a steady presence that does not shift quickly. Sounds become fewer and more distant, arriving without forming any pattern or direction. The light softens as it fades, allowing surfaces to hold a quieter tone that does not draw attention to detail. The atmosphere feels complete in its own way, yet it does not offer any sense of conclusion or closure. Subtle changes continue even within this quieter phase, though they unfold slowly and without emphasis. Shadows deepen and begin to merge, reducing the separation between objects and the ground. The last traces of light move across the landscape, revealing certain forms briefly before allowing them to fade into the surrounding tones. The environment continues its gradual adjustments, carrying forward without creating any clear transition or ending. In observing this moment, there is a quiet awareness that the unanswered quality of the place does not diminish with time, but settles more deeply into the space. The mind begins to accept this condition, allowing the absence of resolution to remain without discomfort. The landscape holds its presence without needing to explain itself, offering a stillness that feels both complete and open at the same time. As night settles fully across the land, the outlines of the settlement and its surroundings draw inward into a quieter, less defined presence. The shelters become darker shapes against the ground, while the forest blends into a deeper horizon that is no longer clearly separated from the sky. The paths that once traced movement disappear into the broader surface, no longer visible as lines, but understood as part of the ground itself. The entire landscape holds together in a dim, unified form, where distinctions remain, but are no longer easily seen. The experience of this time carries a deeper sense of quiet that settles gently into awareness. The air feels cooler and more still, moving slowly across the skin with a calm, steady presence. Sounds are minimal, and when they do appear, they seem distant and separate, not connected to the space in any direct way. The absence of light reduces detail, allowing the mind to perceive the environment as a whole rather than as individual parts. This creates a sense of calm that does not depend on understanding what is seen. Subtle processes continue even within this darkness, though they are felt more than observed. The air shifts in small ways, passing through the space without disturbing its overall quiet. The ground holds everything in place, continuing its gradual adjustments beneath what rests upon it. The unseen movement of water and trees carries on beyond the visible range, forming part of a larger continuity that extends beyond immediate perception. These processes do not bring change that can be clearly followed, but they remain present within the night. In this final stillness, there is a quiet awareness that the unanswered nature of the place does not fade or resolve, but settles into a lasting presence. The mind no longer seeks direction or meaning, allowing the space to remain as it is, open and undefined. What remains is not a question waiting to be answered, but a condition that continues without needing to move forward or return. The landscape holds its quiet incompleteness, offering a sense of rest within its enduring, unanswered stillness.